We are going to dive into this conversation here. Again, you have to remember the theme is what are they selling? And this could not be further from the truth with this next story. Jen Psaki, commentator of MSNBC, former press secretary for Joe Biden, had an interview recently on Jon Stewart's podcast. And you really need to ask yourself here, what are they selling? Let's get into the first part of this conversation. Again, this is about the Democratic Party and maybe what they have done wrong or what they need to do correctly. And what I noticed from this conversation, it appears that Jon Stewart seems to get it a lot better than Jen Psaki does. Or is it that Jen Psaki does get it, but she's trying to mislead people purposely? Let's go ahead and dive into this part here.
People vote on democracy being too analog in this digital world, not responding agilely enough. And now by going through this real executive unitary kind of reordering of constitutional powers, is he doing the people's bidding? Is he doing this thing that will make democracy? How do you process that?
Well, one of the ways I process it is that I feel like when Democrats, and including people who are on television in a variety of ways, were saying things like,
"Thank you,
authoritarianism is under threat and democracy is on the ballot," I think we were misspeaking in a manner that was so academic and ivory tower. It wasn't talking about a lot of the things people actually care about. So I don't know that people voted against democracy. I think they voted in some ways against protection of status quo. And
pause. So here's the first question I think we all need to ask. If Jon Stewart wants to know why voters voted the way that they did, or I would say why more people stayed at home, shouldn't Jon Stewart have that conversation with everyday American voters? Instead, he's having that conversation with Jen Psaki, who is a commentator for MSNBC, who does have a certain agenda. Remember, MSNBC leans left. Fox News leans right. So when they answer these questions, they're going to do so in such a way that benefits their leaning, the way that they lean. Jen Psaki is not your average voter. Jen Psaki is, again, she was Biden's former press secretary. Why are you asking her about the way that people voted or why a lot of people decided to stay at home? So here's Jon Stewart. This is his own podcast. This is not, a part of the Daily Show. And even he's doing it. And this is what I said before about a lot of these people that go start these separate podcasts and they say, well, I'm not corporate media, I'm independent, etc. But they do the same things that corporate media does. If you want to know how people voted or why they voted the way that they did, or if you want to know why they decided to stay at home, you really have to go to the streets. You really have to do what some of us have done, like myself, like JB, those of us at RBN. Jordan Sheraton does this a lot on Status Quo. Like they're always on the ground. You really have to go ask those people. Stop asking like Jen Psaki, Simone Sanders. I don't understand why people do this. Megyn Kelly, like these people don't know. These people live in a certain bubble that exists in DC or New York City where they're not constantly interacting with those people who decided to sit at home or decided to vote for Donald Trump, because that's what this is really about. This conversation is, why did more people come out for Donald Trump, this time around? Why is Donald Trump polls more popular now this time around? Like, why is his approval rating more popular? So you really need to talk to those people, because people like Jen Psaki, they're just going to give you what works for their narrative, what works for their agenda. She don't know. Jen don't know. Jen don't know why people stayed home. Jen don't know why, she really don't. How often does she talk to these people? This is the same woman during Biden's presidency that told everybody when they were upset about the economy and they were complaining about the gas prices. This is the same one that told people, go to a kickboxing class and have a margarita. She don't know. She's out of touch.
And kind of the disconnected academic ivory tower elite language that is too often used by Democrats, sometimes on cable television.
What?
And I'm just
How
being
dare you?
honest. I'm being honest. No, that was one of my takeaways after the election was like, cross authoritarianism and oligarchy out of every script. Nobody talks this way. I don't think that's the only thing, but I do think looking back at the election, one of the outcomes I hope people who are not thrilled by the Trump administration, which is a whole lot of people, take away is that Democrats and people running weren't talking to a large swath of the country. They were kind of talking to a small group of people, progressives. They were talking to people who were primarily focused on things that were, in my view, more academic than they were real issues.
So here's another example. She says Democrats were talking to a small group of people in the country. Then she mentions progressives. When were they talking to progressives? If they were talking to progressives, why wasn't there a progressive agenda? If they were talking to progressive, why was Kamala Harris campaigning across the country with Liz Cheney? What are you talking about? The progressives were ignored. Now, to her point, they were talking to a small, group of people. I would say that group that they were talking to is the DC bubble. That elite, dim establishment DC bubble. I would say that's who they were talking to, the consultant class, the people that constantly, go out and push these political campaigns. Those were the people that I would say they were talking to. That is a small group of people. But I wouldn't say they were talking to progressives. If anything, they didn't want anything to hear. They didn't want to hear what progressives were saying. Progressives were continuing to tell them ceasefire and arms embargo to Israel. They didn't want to hear about that. Kamala Harris shooed those progressives away. So that's misleading. This is similar to what Chris Cuomo did. He said, oh, you're talking to those progressives. Nope, that was not what was happening. They're trying to make it seem like the Democratic Party has been giving more attention to progressives when in actuality, those are the group that they tend to ignore. Liz Cheney got more time, boo. Liz Cheney got more time. And I think we're going to let's go to another part here, because this is trippy. Like, we have a couple of clips here. Let's get into this part of the discussion. I broke it up into little segments because I thought you guys would get a kick out of this.
I think what he's saying is that's not how the world works. So I am going to exploit corruption because we're the biggest bullies on the planet. And it's time that we swing our thing and make that happen and say things like, hey, Canada. I mean, why are you going?
Why Canada?
He's trying to talk about Donald Trump. He said Donald Trump is making people believe that he's going after corruption.
But is he basically exposing how the world and how business actually works?
First of all, now I'm going to keep thinking about Donald Trump swinging his thing, which
Please
is a phrase
don't do
you
that.
just
I apologize for
you
that.
just used.
It was a Teddy Roosevelt.
It was in the riff.
Big stick thing, and I
got it.
Right.
Okay, I think what it is exposing is how he thinks the world should work, right? And how he thinks business, to your point, should work.
But does it work that way, Jen?
I don't think that actually government does work that way. And I don't think I think there are corrupt people in both parties. And we know that Eric Adams, well, I guess who knows what's happening with him next. Menendez, there are corrupt people. But I think that for the most part, the people who have been leading the Democratic Party, at least in recent years, have been trying to do good in more of a way of protecting rule of law, of trying to stand up for people in this country than what we have seen from what has become Trump's Republican Party.
So what is Jen Psaki selling here? She believes that there are corrupt people in both parties. But what Jen Psaki does not do is she doesn't take that extra step to just blatantly call it out, which is that both parties are corrupt. Jen Psaki is still trying to sell the Democratic Party to the average viewer watching Jon Stewart's interview with her. And you should look at the comments. They're pretty laughable because I don't think a lot of people are falling for this. What is she selling? She's still selling the Democratic Party. So the way that you get away with that is that you call out that there are corrupt people in the Democratic Party, and you'll call out, of course, the corruption in the Republican Party, but you won't take it a step further and say that the party itself is corrupt. She then proceeds to say that the Democrat leaders have been trying to stop that. Really? Did Nancy Pelosi try to stop that? Nancy Pelosi, who participates in insider trading, that's also corrupt. So you see what she's trying to do? She's still trying to make sure she toes that line so she can still get access to some of those Dem leaders on her MSNBC show. If you want to point to corruption, you can't just point at Menendez. You can't just point at Eric Adams. You also have to point at Nancy Pelosi, who was in charge of the House. So the Dem leadership is also corrupt. And that's because the party is corrupt. But she's not going to say that. And Jon Stewart isn't going to say that either. So what are they trying to do? They are trying to convince you that there is some issues within the Democratic Party, but it's because of these few people. But the party itself is still good and decent. We have to be very mindful of the message that people are trying to send. And this is what I get across. That's why I watch these interviews, and I'm crazy like that, okay? I'm crazy. I watch these things like multiple times. I watch these interviews multiple times. And then people will be like, Sabby, oh my God, how are you doing this? Da, da, da. Because I watch it once with no intentions. And then I watch it a second time and I try. That's when I do the stop, pause, and all that type of stuff, because I'm trying to see, what did I miss? What did they really say here? So that's important that you understand what Jen Psaki is ultimately trying to do. She is trying to still make the case for the Democratic Party, and she is still trying to sell and promote the Democratic Party at all means necessary. Let's continue on.
It's not the party of Mitt Romney or John McCain anymore from what that version of the Republican Party is.
But that party was ineffective to a large, that's what I'm saying. The world doesn't work that way. Like when we say, we're promoting democracy and goodness throughout the world, and yet we bomb the shit out of two countries for 20 years, create untold instability in a region because of our own interests. What he's saying is, I don't want to give money to Ukraine unless they're going to give us rare earth materials according to that value. But
that may be giving him too much credit.
No, I think he said it literally.
I understand that. But also, he loves Vladimir Putin and loves his dictatorial nature. And I think he also might be inclined to just say, you know what? You take whatever land you want and we'll end this whole thing. And then I can say I ended this war.
So do you see the difference here between what Jon Stewart is saying and what Jen Psaki is saying? Jon Stewart is calling out the fact, he's like, yo, we bombed this country. We killed all these people. And I feel like her focus, again, her job is to make sure that she continues to demonize the Republican Party. That's her job. If people are wondering, that is her job. So instead of focusing on what Jon Stewart just said about all these people that the U.S. government bombed, all these people they continue to kill, Jen Psaki is choosing to, let's pivot back to Donald Trump and it's an ego thing. And yeah, you can say that. Like you can point to the fact and say Trump wants to be the hero or he wants to be, feed his ego. And yeah, there's probably truth to that. But that wasn't the conversation. The conversation is the fact of what the U.S. government has done to these countries and to these people. And she steers away from that and says, oh, well, but Trump loves Vladimir Putin and he just wants to toot his own horn and da-da-da. Instead of focusing on the issue at hand. These are just things that I notice.
I don't know that he's actually going to stick to what he said about Ukraine and who knows, but he says all sorts of things. I hear what you're saying. I think the history of the country led by Democrats and Republicans is imperfect. There's many moments, even before Afghanistan, even before Iraq, etc. But what I'm getting at, I think, is that Trump I mean, what he is rebuilding the government as is in the model of loyalty to him, right?
No question there. No question there.
And that is not what I think leaders from other parties, I mean, Republicans too, have ever tried to do in modern history.
It's old school. It's old school patronage. It's what civil
Yes.
service was. The swamp was created to remove that aspect of patronage. But I wonder sometimes, how far have we really come from the model? And this is not about the administrative state. This is like, how far have we come from the model of searching the globe for cheaper materials and cheaper labor? And when we pretend that we're doing it for moral value and freedom, are we kidding ourselves?
And this is why, some people they've seen these conversations that Jon Stewart has had, whether it's with Hakeem Jeffries, whether it's with Jen Psaki, and they want him to run. Like, there's a number of people that have pointed to Jon Stewart should be the one that's running for president, because he kind of gets where the progressive mindset is. He kind of understands also where the anti-movement energy is coming from. Whereas a lot of these people who have been in this space for a long time, some of them don't understand it, but some of them don't want to understand it. And some of them are paid not to understand it. That's why some people are pointing towards him. They're saying, well, Jon Stewart should probably run, etc. I think it's great that he gets it. But I also want to remind people that Jon Stewart is on a podcast. When you're hosting a podcast and you're running for political office, these are two different things. So while he may be a little bit more free right now, he's not a candidate. So just keep that in mind. When you're not a candidate, there are certain things that you're going to say that you may not say if you're running for office, especially if he does run and he runs through the two-party system. So that's something to think about. So I see these wheels turning, and I see people saying these things. Oh, the next Bernie is going to be Jon Stewart and da-da-da. And, Bernie talked a good game too. And we saw how that turned out. So just something just to keep in mind there. I do want to remind people that, again, when you're on a podcast, you're hosting a podcast and you are not running for office, you're going to be a little bit more free, with your rhetoric. Then we're going to get to this part here about what the Democratic Party has to do. Listen to this.
The Democrats have to effectively counter, because that's where we can get value. We subsidize pharmaceutical companies and pay the highest fucking pill prices in forever. $20 billion a year, apparently, to oil and gas. Like, what are we fucking doing?
Yeah. Look, and there are some people you've mentioned, like Elizabeth Warren, who do talk about this kind of stuff. I'm not saying she's writing the plans. Yeah, who's writing the plans?
I'll tell you who's writing the plans.
Who is it?
The corporations.
Oh, well, I thought it was like, who is it?
And the lobbyists. They are.
Yes.
Jen, I'm going to tell you a story.
Pause. So do you see what she's doing? Well, Elizabeth Warren talks about that. The problem I notice with, in particular, the Democratic Party is there's a lot of talking, but not action, right? It's like, I don't know. It kind of reminds me of that coworker that tells you every week they're going to quit. Does everybody know this person? Has everybody had that one coworker that has told you or someone, secretly that, this is it. I'm going to quit this week. This is my last week. I'm putting in my notice. I'm done. That's it. I can't take it anymore. I didn't have it. I went through this with multiple jobs where people would come to me. I don't know why me, but people would come to me and they would say, that's it. I'm done. I can't take this anymore. I'm done. I'm putting in my notice this week. I'm done. Next week come around, I'll be like, hey, so you're not leaving? No, I decided, now's not the right time. And, we kind of talk things over. And I think I was just mad last week. Oh, okay. End of the day. That's it. I'm done. I quit. I'm done. This is it. So it's like that. It's like the employee that tells you every week that this is going to be their last week, that they're going to put in their notice and they don't do it. With the Democratic Party, there are politicians that speak on said issues. Like Jen Psaki said, Elizabeth Warren talks about it, but they don't actually do it. They're like the coworker that doesn't actually quit. They tell you they're going to quit, but they never quit. And then you end up quitting before they leave. You know, you look back 3 years later, they're still working there and they're still telling the next person that they're going to leave. So there's a lot of talk and not as much action. And that's something I noticed with the Democratic Party. And what you see happening with the Republican Party is, I think in particular with Donald Trump, he talks, but he's also doing what he said he was going to do. And I think what is happening, I think that some people, particularly those who do still support the Democratic Party, they want someone who's going to do that. They want someone who's not just going to say, we should have health care for everybody. We should have $15 minimum wage. They want someone who's going to go in and actually do it. And the crazy thing is, since Trump has been president, he's shown you exactly what the president can do. So now there's no excuse. Dems have no excuse. We all seen it. The mask is off. Trump showed everybody what can be done.
I understand what you're saying. I thought you were going to tell me some insightful plan you'd seen from somebody who's going to run for something. I was excited for a moment. Go ahead. I know
these people better than I do. I don't know these people.
I may, but you're like, I thought you were going to be like, I saw this great plan. I'm like, great.
Here's what's so interesting. On the Republican side, the synchronicity between the think tanks and the politicians and the billionaire donors, right? And the media arm, they work together. It is the circle of life. It is the Lion King. They understand that. Like, it's
who's Simba?
Simba is Rupert Murdoch, unfortunately.
Oh, I didn't say Mike Johnson.
No, he's
could
sweet.
be.
He's a little sweet-faced boy. I mean, Donald Trump was giving a press conference. Rupert Murdoch was sitting next to him, and he's like, hey, the Wall Street Journal wrote some shit about me, but we'll take care of that. Rupert Murdoch said in a meeting, it was released in those documents after the Fox lawsuit, we need to do everything we can to help Donald Trump. Like, this is absolute corrupt. That it gets us back to the thing of like, this is how the fucking world works. And yet somehow you're connected. You were the press secretary in Biden's thing. You worked for Obama. You worked at the State Department. You understand that. You're now at MSNBC. None of these people are talking to each other and working together in any way.
Well, yeah, because we think the other side is really messed up. I mean, look, but it's also how.
Was Obama not corporate? Again, Obama had a Wall Street cabinet. So you see where she came from, right? You can't really criticize this big money interest, the corruption, when you supported the corruption just under a different party, just under the Democratic Party. There was corruption under Barack Obama. There was corruption under Joe Biden. There was corruption under Bill Clinton. There was corruption under George H.W. Bush. There was corruption under George W. Bush. There was corruption under all these presidents that I've known since I've been alive in my lifetime. There has been corruption. So corruption isn't unique to the Republican Party. Corruption is also a part of the Democratic Party because both parties are bought and paid for. So that's not something she's going to address, though. She's not going to get into that.
The world is working, which I think is a huge problem that Democrats need to be clear and aware of. I mean, Hannity was like meeting with the Republican caucus. There's more and more and more examples of what you're talking about.
Yes. And it seems very effective, but also effective in that they're creating policies. Now, I don't like a lot of them, and I think they're lying about a lot of them, but they've certainly created a machine. And nobody is building that machine as far as I can tell. And even within the media, you know, Rupert Murdoch and then Roger Ailes, and now I don't know who's running, but they run it with a really clear mandate. You're at MSNBC. Do they come to you every day and go, here's what we think is important to preserve and fight for whatever?
No, everybody gets a zillion press releases and pitch calls, but no.
No. I'm talking about the head of it.
Oh, no. You determine, we determine, each of us for our shows, here's what I'm going to cover today, and here's what I'm going to talk about, and here's what I think is important, which there's an independence-ish of that.
No, there isn't. There is no independence of that, because what Jen Psaki leaves out is that the producer has to approve it. Talk to people who worked for these networks. Didn't Mark Lamont Hill work for CNN? Talk to people who worked for these networks. The producer still has to approve it. You can say, this is what I'm going to cover, but they have to approve it. And if they decide, well, no, you can't talk about that, then there you go. So you see what's happening now? Now they're trying to push this. Oh, but there's some independence in what I talk about because, I get to pick the topic. I mean, this happens with other jobs too, where it's like you can pick something, but then there's someone above you that decides whether or not that's a yes or that's a no. And particularly in corporate media. Now, yes, of course, Rupert Murdoch heavily involved in Fox News, but let's not sit back and pretend like MSNBC and CNN doesn't have some of these corrupt billionaire money influence and shareholders as well. See, that's the difference. The Democratic Party and the Dem media, they tend to be a little bit more covert, right? It doesn't mean it's not happening. It's just not in front of your face. Whereas the Republican Party and the Republican media tend to be more overt. Rupert Murdoch is not a secret. He's out there in the open. Elon Musk, his billionaire influence is not a secret. It's out there in the open under the Trump administration. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party also have billionaire influence and billionaire donors and billionaire pulling the strings as well, but you don't see them the way that you see Elon Musk. This is something James Lee and I were talking about earlier. That's the difference. Democrats are more covert, Republicans are more overt. And I told you after Trump won, I said, watch, the Democratic Party and the Dem media, they are now going to try to go on this kind of press tour of the Republicans are bought and controlled by billionaire money, as if the Democratic Party isn't bought and also controlled by billionaire money. I just did a deep dive into Hakeem Jeffries and where the fuck he came from and how he got that seat. Billionaire money and influence, and of course, investors being bought. That's how they get there. Most people don't get there because they were good at their job. They get there because they have the money to get there. We'll go on a little bit more here, and I have one more part I want to show you.
And there also is, you're not waiting to be told what to say about anything. You're going to say what you think. So people can trust that. And that is a good thing.
See, I disagree with that. I think it's not that you're able to be independent. It's that you're then a prisoner purely to the minute by minutes. Purely
You mean
to
in terms of ratings?
the ratings, incentives, and all those other things. If you don't have the ideological component, right, then you don't have a governing authority of editorial authority, right? The greatest trick Roger Ailes ever played was he delegitimized editorial authority while exercising absolute steel trapdoor editorial authority.
The greatest thing he did, because it led them to be an arm piece, a mouthpiece of the right wing.
It led them to be exactly what he wanted it to be, which is an effective expression of his worldview.
And MSNBC, I am unburdened by not having, I can share whatever I think. I have obviously worked in Democratic politics for 20 years. I don't hide anything about that. It is.
Okay. Did everybody catch what she just did there? She said, I am unburdened by. And you really want us to believe, Jen Psaki, that there's no influence there with your show and MSNBC? Who else says unburdened by? Didn't Kamala Harris go around here for months telling people unburdened by what has been, unburdened by what can be done? I am unburdened by. And now Jen Psaki saying the same thing. And you really want us to believe there's no influence there? Let me tell you something. Some of us who have been to these networks will let you know this is not the case. While they may be able to pick some of these stories, and I'd say some, the producer decides what they can and what they cannot talk about. There have been a number of commentators that were a part of these networks that left or were fired, and they revealed this, whether it was Mehdi Hassan, whether it was Mark Lamont Hill, right? Whether it was Dawn Lip, like a number of people that have revealed these things. So now we're all supposed to sit here and believe that all of those people were lying about that and Jen Psaki is telling the truth? Or are we just unburdened by what has been, right? Get out of here.
The progressive leaning network. But nobody is, to the frustration at times of many elected Democrats, it is not a mouthpiece of the Democratic Party.
I don't want it to be a mouthpiece of the Democratic Party.
That is an outright lie. It is an outright lie. Again, you have to know where she comes from. What did she tell you? Yeah, I have worked in politics for years for the Democratic Party, for Obama, and then for Joe Biden. And we're supposed to believe that you have no bias at all? Get out of here, man. Get the fuck out of here. This part was probably the most cringe-worthy part here. But truthful, Jon Stewart laid it out there.
I've been shocked by how undemocratic the Democratic Party can be.
Tell me, what do you mean by, I don't disagree with you necessarily, but what do you mean by that?
By putting their foot on the scales to get, make sure that Hillary Clinton comes out of the thing, or make sure that, that they're listening to that anger about the way that even the ACA, quite frankly, struck me as a very conservative. You mean
because it didn't have a public option in it?
Correct.
Did you notice that Jen Psaki doesn't look surprised when he talks about how they cheated Bernie Sanders and pushed forward Hillary Clinton? She's not surprised. She knows. Now let's go back to Jen picking her own stories. Okay. Because when Jen picks these stories that she wants to discuss, one of the things that Jen likes to talk about is democracy. They're destroying our democracy, democracy, democracy. But Jen Psaki sits right there and she goes, she knows about what happened to Bernie Sanders. She knows that he was cheated. She knows that they rigged it for Hillary Clinton. She knows all that. But Jen Psaki doesn't choose to talk about that side of the Democratic Party. When she picks these stories, she's picked stories that will focus on January 6th and talk about how what Donald Trump is doing is undemocratic. But she does not choose to select any of those stories to show that the Democratic Party has also not been practicing democracy. Now, she just told you she gets to pick her stories. You be the judge, folks.
That it didn't address the very thing that was causing the foundational upset. If I were to break this down narratively, what I think the Democrats have forgotten is government may not be perfect, but it's the only thing large enough to offset multinational corporate exploitation and corruption.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't act like that's urgent and that affects people's lives, then so if the big policies that we make are billions more dollars to insurance companies that we think are fucking people over left and right for their healthcare, so isn't that part of why people lost faith?
Yeah. So yes, I think we're saying, well, I'm trying to say something similar, which is this.
Boom, boom.
Which is Democrats just lost everything. They control nothing. They control, they don't control the House. They don't control the Senate. They don't control the White House, and they don't control the Supreme Court. So now is the time to break some shit, right? And break some China.
They do control the email lists that continue to ask for money.
Well, that's true.
They still have.
You hear that, right? Yeah, of course. They control that email list to ask for more money. But the point that Jon Stewart was making there again is is this part of the reason why they lost? Again, I think you need to talk to actual voters. And I know, Jon Stewart is a celebrity and maybe it might freak some people out, but he's been in Congress before. And I think people probably wouldn't get too starstruck with Jon Stewart because, like I said, he has kind of walked into Congress before. I think that Jon Stewart should go out on the street, just like Don Lemon does or has been doing right before the election, and just ask regular people who they voted for and why. You're asking someone who was basically is a DC puppet. You're asking someone that was a part of 2 presidential administrations why working class people decided not to come out and vote for Kamala Harris or stayed home. She doesn't know those people. She lives in a different world, just like Jon Stewart lives in a different world. She don't know these people. So it comes back to a class issue. That's really what it comes back to. So what are they selling? Jen Psaki is trying to sell a Democratic Party. So she's willing to point out that there's some people in the party that are a little bit corrupt, but she's still trying to sell and promote that party because that's her job. She's a part of MSNBC. Same thing with Simone Sanders. That is their job. Regardless of what they will tell you, that's their job. Just like it's the job of Fox News host Jesse Waters, who I was talking about recently, Jesse Waters, and all of the rest of the Fox News commentators, it's their job to sell the Republican Party. And CNN, they sell the Democratic Party too, but CNN is all over the place right now. Like, since the ratings, they're all over the place. They all know what's going on. So they all have that agenda. And this is why I think it's important that you do watch independent media and try to watch independent media that isn't a part of one of these parts, because people are going to lean to their side. So it's like, if I were part of the Democratic Party, I'm probably going to lean more to the Democrat side and promote them, because that's the team you're on. If I were a part of the Republican Party, I'm probably going to lean to the Republican side and promote them because that's the team I'm on. I mean, it's like asking, if you watch sports, I mean, that would have been like asking Michael Jordan when he was playing for the Chicago Bulls to not lean on the Bulls side. That would have been like asking Michael Jordan, don't lean. I know you on their team, but don't lean on their side. I want you to lean on the Celtics side. Start talking good things about the Celtics more. And oftentimes people are going to promote their team and side with their team. That's not how I feel. That's just what I've seen. They are out there selling things. These interviews with Jon Stewart are pretty interesting, I would say. But some people are saying that maybe Jon Stewart should be the one that should run for president. Now, there was that situation where Jon Stewart did give a medal to a Nazi. I can't remember if he apologized for that or not. I don't even know if he knew at that time. I don't think he did, but I'm not sure if he apologized. Hopefully he has course corrected. But I would say if Jon Stewart was going to run, I think Jon Stewart has a big enough name that he wouldn't have to run in any of those parties. I think Jon Stewart has a big enough name and enough money that he can run outside the duopoly. That's my take on that. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.